Good morning, dear learners. Welcome to teaching learning session. Today we'll start our session from where we left last time. Last time we were discussing about hypothesis. What is hypothesis? And research problem as hypothesis testing. What is hypothesis? Hypothesis is an educated guess. Whenever the first and the foremost thing is we should frame a topic, and then according to topic we should frame the objectives. To check those objectives, researcher formulates some hypotheses, and these hypotheses are nothing but the educated guess, and it is very convenient, often convenient, to structure a research problem in terms of hypothesis to be tested. When a researcher forms a hypothesis, it is the responsibility of a researcher to test those hypotheses, whether those educated guess or hypotheses are correct or not. The hypothesis must be agreed by both the manager and the researcher. But the formal statement is primarily the responsibility of a researcher. So it is the responsibility of a researcher to formulate the hypothesis. When a researcher formulates a hypothesis and tests the hypothesis, there are the chances of error. Whenever we do the research, we do at some confidential level. It could be 90%, 95%, or 99%. In social sciences, we usually carry out research at 95% confidence level or 90% confidence level. What does the confidence level mean? The confidence level means 95% confidence level or 90% confidence level means we are sure that we can generalize the results at 95%. Or in other words, there are 5% chances of error or 10% chances of error if we conduct our research at 90% confidence level. So in social sciences, we carry out research at 95 or 90% confidence level, and we left some 5 or 10% chances. There could be the 5 or 10% chances of error. When there are 5 or 10% chances of an error, when we test the hypothesis, there could be the two types of errors: type 1 error and type 2 error. What is type 1 error? Type 1 error is also known as false positive, and type 2 error is known as false negative. What is type 1 error? Type 1 error, if the investigator or the researcher rejects the null hypothesis that is actually true in the population. When we reject null hypothesis while actually that is true. For example, if someone goes for the COVID test, the null hypothesis states that that patient is not COVID positive. This is the hypothesis, null hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis could be patient is COVID positive. But because of type 1 error, we reject the null hypothesis that patient is not positive. That patient is not positive, and the researcher gives the report that patient is positive. So this is false positive. Although the patient is not positive, right, is not suffering from COVID or any other disease, but the report says that suffering from a particular disease or COVID, then this is false positive or type 1 error. When we reject the null hypothesis when we should not. In fact, we should not reject the null hypothesis. Null hypothesis is correct, and we reject the correct hypothesis, correct null hypothesis. That is true. When the null hypothesis is true and we reject the null hypothesis, then this type of error is known as false positive error or type 1 error. Type 2 error. Type 2 error is false negative error. False negative means when the investigator fails to reject the null hypothesis, that is actually false. Means when null hypothesis is not correct, then again we accept the null hypothesis. Then that is type 2 error. Suppose it is our statement of hypothesis is that patient is not suffering from disease, and alternative hypothesis is that patient is suffering from a particular disease. We accept the null hypothesis that not suffering from particular disease, while actually the patient is suffering from that particular disease. That is false negative, while it is positive. Type 1 error and type 2 error. Before I proceed further, remember one thing: we always write the null hypothesis in a negative way, that there is no significant difference between the two. Suppose I want to check out that males are better, whether males or females who is the better driver, males or females. My null hypothesis will be there is no significant difference in the driving skills of males and females. Alternative hypothesis could be many, that males are better driver than the females, or hypothesis null hypothesis 2 can be alternative hypothesis 2 can be that females are better driver than the males, while the null hypothesis always states that there is no significant difference. Right? Job satisfaction impacts the level of stress, or vice versa. Stress impacts the job satisfaction. My null hypothesis will be there is no significant impact of stress on job satisfaction level of an individual. Right? Always remember this thing. The type 1 error or type 2 error. Let me explain it once again with an example. You test whether a drug intervention can alleviate the symptoms of autoimmune disease. In this case, the null hypothesis is that new drug has no effect on the symptoms of disease. No significant effect on the symptom of disease. Alternate hypothesis could be that drug is effective for alleviating the symptoms of the disease. Type 1 error happens when you get false positive result. What is false positive result in this? The false positive result is when you conclude that drug intervention improved the symptoms when it actually did not. These improvements could have arisen from other random factors or because of measurement errors. It means the drug has no impact, or if drug intervention actually did not improve the symptoms, but you conclude that drug intervention improved the symptoms. This is false positive. Type 2 error is when you get false negative result. You conclude that drug intervention did not improve the symptoms when it actually did. Your study may have missed key indicators of improvement or attributed any improvement to other factors instead. Right? Accepts the null hypothesis and from statistical point of view, accepts the null hypothesis and reject the null hypothesis. Null hypothesis is true, the true state of nature, or when the null hypothesis is false. Accepts the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is true. When you reject the null hypothesis when actually it is true, then it is type 1 error. And when you accept the null hypothesis when actually it is not true is type 2 error, or you reject the null hypothesis when it is not correct is true type of the thing. So I hope this is clear. Type error 1, type 1 error and type 2 error. Type 1 error is when you reject the null hypothesis when it is correct, when it is true, and type 2 error is when you accept the null hypothesis when it is not true or when it is false. Right? Why we carry out the research? It is very important to go through the literature. Extensive literature review is very important in research. Once your problem is formulated, the researcher should take extensive literature survey connected with the problem. Why it is required? Because it helps in formulation of objectives. It helps to find out the research gap. Right? It is very important that researchers should go through the literature to acquire all possible knowledge related to the chosen topic area. Why is it required? To gap identification, so that you could find out the gap between the research. If someone else has conducted research on a certain topic which you have chosen, how could you proceed further? How your research will help through research gap, through literature review, you will come to know how your research will help academia as well as industry. This gap identification is very important. What this gap identification is, when you try to find out what has been done by the previous researcher and what is supposed to be done, what is required in the market. Next is improving current research methodologies. If you feel like we can conduct this research in another way, we can apply some other methods, then it helps in improving the current research methodology. And positioning, finding an existing body of knowledge, your research will enhances the knowledge of academia as well as of the industry. After going through the research, after finding out the research gap, it is very important that you should prepare a research design. What is research design? The research design includes many things. The first thing about one which is very important is sample design in research design. What is sample? What is sample? Sample is a representative of population under study. Suppose you are carrying out a study on teenagers, eating habits of teenagers or drinking habits of teenagers. That is from students or children from 13 to say 18 or 19 year of age. What is their drinking habit? You want to find out their drinking and smoking habit, and your population under study is your adolescent, that is the teenager, that is a students or the children who are between the age group of say 13 to 19. And there could be n number of children could be in this category, fall into this category. You cannot carry out, you cannot conduct interviews or carry out research or cannot conduct the interviews from all of them. It is very much required that you should select this sample from your given population. That is, sample is choosing the sample unit who are to be surveyed. There are ways in which you select your sample, right? We'll discuss it when we'll discuss about the sample design in detail, right? Choosing the sample unit, choosing the sample size, how many to be surveyed, because it is not possible to carry out to be that all should be surveyed. Suppose if there are 1,000 or the 2,000 or 3,000 uh, students are there, teenagers are there, you cannot conduct research or you cannot survey all the 3,000. You have to choose certain sample size, and there is a criteria how will you choose your sample unit or the sample and sample size. There is a formula to find out the sample size. Then choosing sample procedure, how to ensure that those who are to be interviewed are included in the sample. Choosing media, how will you survey those samples, how will you collect the data from those samples. Then you have to choose a media. It could be through mail survey, it could be through personal interviews, it could be through telephonic interview, it could be through observation. So it is very important that one should prepare a research design, and the most important thing of research design is sample design, to find out the sample unit, sample size, sample procedure, and then choosing the media. Then collection of data is required. Data collection is also known as the field work. It involves administrating the research tools to gather the data. Primary data can be collected either through experiment or through surveys. If the researcher conducts an experiment, he observes the quantitative measures. The researcher should select the method of collecting data, taking into consideration the nature of investigation, objective, scope of inquiry, financial resources, available time, and desired degree of accuracy. You have chosen your sample size, sample units. Now you have to collect the data from those samples. How will you collect the data from samples? The researcher selects the method how he or she will collect the data from the sample under study. While collecting the data or while selecting the methods of data collection, there are various things which researchers should understood. The first is nature of investigation. What type of investigation researcher is carrying out? We discussed about the nature of investigation in our previous lecture. Objective and scope of the inquiry. What is the objective? What are the objectives of the study? What is the scope of inquiry? Then he should consider the financial resources, time available, and desired degree of accuracy. It could be 90%, 95%, or 99%. All these things should be considered at the time of data collection. After collection of data, the another things which comes up is analysis of data. What is analysis of data? The conversion of raw data into information requires that the data be edited and coded so that the data may be transferred to computer or other data storage media. If database is large, there are many advantages to utilizing the computer. What is data analysis? Suppose you have collected the data. Now you have to edit and code that data. There are various ways in which researcher edit and code the data. And then applies various type of tests to check whether the hypothesis is accepted or rejected, or whether the objectives are met or not. Right? After analysis and interpretation of data come the preparation of report or the thesis. While researcher is preparing a report or a thesis, there are many important things which researcher should take into account. The first thing is the format of a report or the thesis should be the first and foremost thing is preliminary pages. The preliminary pages, the report should carry out the title and data followed by the acknowledgements, forwards. Then there should be table of contents. Then there should be list of tables, graphs, charts, if any given in the report. So all these things should be included in the preliminary pages. After this, the main text. Main text of report should have parts like introduction. Introduction contain a clear statement of research and explanation. It should introduce, it should tell about the statement. It should describe the statement, the explanation of that statement. The main body should be presented in a logical sequence and broken down into readily identifiable section. Next could be the summary of findings. At the end, after introduction, there would be appear a statement of findings and recommendation in non-technical language. If finding is extensive, they should be summarized. First of all, there should be the preliminary pages, then come the main text. In main text, there should be the introduction. After introduction, there should be the main report. Main reports includes each and everything like literature review, findings and analysis and interpretation of data, and then the findings. After this, your researcher should summarizes the finding. If findings are large, then it is responsibility of a researcher to summarize those findings. At the end comes the conclusion. Towards the end of the main text, researcher should again put down the results of the research clearly and precisely. It is final summing up. At the end, researcher should conclude. And at the end of the report, there should be appendices that should enlist the technical data, questionnaires if you have any other thing which you would like to insert in your report, and then comes the bibliography. Right? I hope this is clear. Now we'll proceed to the next topic, that is methods and techniques of data collection. We discuss, as we know, that data collection is basically a field work. And how can a researcher collect the data? Before understanding the methods of data collection, it is very important that you should understand there are two types of data: primary data and secondary data. What is primary data? Primary data are those which are collected afresh and for the first time, and does happen to be original in character. When a researcher collects a fresh data, then that is known as primary data. That is, in simpler word, when researcher goes to the field and collects the data from the sample or from the population under study, then that type of data is known as the primary data. While Secondary data are those which have already been collected by the some other agency and which have already been processed, like data collected by the government agencies. And when we use those data in our research, then that data is known as secondary data. Suppose we are carrying out a research on NPS of a bank, and we are taking the data from RBI's site or from that bank site, then that type of data is known as secondary data. Right? Secondary data are information which are previously collected by the some organization to satisfy its own needs, but being used by the department under reference for an entirely different reasons, like the data collected by the census data collected by the government. The objective of collection of data could be different for both the researcher as well as for the someone who has collected that data. It is very important while you are using the secondary data, you should understand which data you require for your study. Just take the useful data. Primary data, when collected afresh, when researcher surveys the field and collects the data, then that data is known as primary data. Suppose I want to find out about the smoking habit. I want to compare the smoking habit between the males and females. The researcher studies the population or sample and takes the data from population under study. It could be through observation method, it could be through interview, it could be through questionnaire method. Right? Methods of collecting primary data. When a researcher has to collect the primary data, there are various methods to collect the primary data. The first method is observation method. What is this observation method? The investigator collects the requisite information personally through observation. As the investigator is solely responsible for collection of data by this method, his training, skills, and knowledge plays an important role in quality of primary data. So, what is primary data? Primary when you collect the primary data through observation method. What is that observation method? Observation method is when the investigator collects the requisite information personally through observation. When the researcher observes the population under study, and through observation researcher collects the data. Because researcher is directly responsible for collection of data, so methods, his trainings, skills, knowledge plays a very important role in quality of primary data. If researcher is not well trained, his skills are not good, then the collected data could be biased or incorrect. A slight variation of this procedure is indirect oral investigation. Observation method is when researcher observes the population under study. The next is oral investigation. What is oral investigation? Where data are collected through indirect sources. Persons who are likely to have information about the problem are interrogated, and on the basis of their answers, primary data become available. Like, for example, commissions of inquiry or committees appointed by the government collect the primary data by this method. Right? So, oral investigation is when you collect the data through indirect sources. Suppose a committee has been formed or a commission has been formed for the inquiry of certain things. When the inquiry commission or committee asks n number of questions to the n number of people and then collects the information This type of information or data is known as, or this method is known as oral investigation. Next type of method to collect the data is questionnaire method. A popular and common method of collection of primary data. Person is personally interviewed, recording their answer in a structured questionnaire. What is questionnaire? Questionnaire is, there is a structured questionnaire when suppose you want to ask 10 questions and you have structured those questions, you have written down those questions, and a researcher asked those specified questions to the respondent out of from the sample. The information is recorded in the questionnaire. Occasionally, a part of questionnaire is unstructured so that interviewer can feel free to share information about the intimate matters with the interviewer. There are two types of the questionnaire. Before I proceed further, understand questionnaire. Questionnaire are of two types: structured and unstructured questionnaire. When you carry out the interviews, you conduct the interviews on structured. The interviews could be structured interviews or unstructured interviews. Structured interviews are when you have n number of questions to ask, and you note down those questions and just ask those questions from the respondent, and records the answers of those questions. Then that method is known as, then that type of questionnaire is known as structured questionnaire. Next is unstructured questionnaire. Unstructured questionnaire are those questionnaire in which interview can, or the respondent can feel free to share information. You ask unstructured questionnaire is, you have certain questions in your mind, you ask the question, and when the respondent has given the answer, suddenly a new question came up your mind and you ask that question which was not framed earlier. On the spot, when you ask certain question, the question came up in your mind through the answer given by the respondent. Then that type of interview or questionnaire is known as unstructured questionnaire. This is even what type of interviews are important, that is structured or unstructured. As the data are collected by the field staff personally, it is also known as personal interview method. Much of accuracy of collected data, however, depends on the ability and tactfulness of the investigator, who should be subjected to the special training to how they should be elicit the correct information through friendly discussion. So, whenever a researcher collects the data through questionnaire or through interview method, through structured interview or through unstructured interview method, the training of field surveyor plays a very important role. It is very important that researcher or the person who is collecting the data through the personal interview method should be tactful. It depends on the tactfulness and the ability of the investigator how to pose a question, how to make the interviewer feel comfortable, and how to get the correct information through friendly discussions. Another type of method is mailed questionnaire method. What is mailed questionnaire method? It was a questionnaire method or interview method in which the researcher or the surveyor goes to the field and collects the data. Another method is mailed questionnaire method. Mailed questionnaire method is a set of questions relevant to the subject of inquiry are mailed to the selected list of a person with a request to return them duly filled in. Supplementary instruction regarding the definition of terms used and methods of filling up the form should accompany the questionnaire. This method can also be used when the respondents are literate and can answer the question in writing. The question should be very clear without any ambiguity, keeping in mind that there is no investigator to help the respondent. And this method saves the time and cost and covers a large area. The absence of investigator renders the responses less reliable, and it suffers from the non-responses. So in a personal interview method or questionnaire method, the researcher or the surveyor personally asks the questions from the respondent. If there is any doubt, the researcher clear those doubts and tries to get the data, accurate data, tries to get the accurate and non-ambiguous data. The another method is mailed questionnaire. Mailed questionnaire, as the name indicates, when we mail questionnaires to the respondent. We have a list of respondent, and then we mail those questionnaire. Researcher prepared a questionnaire, structured questionnaire, right? And structured questionnaire which is relevant to the subject of inquiry, and mail those questionnaires to the respondents and ask them to return the questionnaire duly filled in. With this questionnaire, other instructions regarding the definition of terms and the methods of filling up the forms should accompany the questionnaire. But the problem with this questionnaire is that this method is, it is very important that respondent should be literate and can answer the question in writing. If respondent is not literate, if respondent is illiterate, it would be difficult to get answers. So you can adopt this method with literate respondents. Next problem is there could be ambiguity, or a respondent could misunderstood the question, as researcher is not there to clarify the doubts. So it is very important when researcher is adopting this method, the question should be clear and non-ambiguous, because researcher is not there to clarify the doubts. The best thing about this method is it saves times and cost. But because respondent or the investigator is not there, absence of the investigator render the responses less reliable. It could be without going through the question or without understanding the question, respondent might have answered the questions. It is difficult to rely on the answers. The another problem with this method is it suffers from the non-response, high degree of non-response. Next method is telephonic interview. This method of collecting information consists in contacting respondents on telephone itself. The method is inexpensive but limited in scope, as respondent must possess telephone. The telephone interview method is used in industrial survey, especially in the developed regions. validity of data depends on our questionnaire. So it is very important that while you are drafting a questionnaire, while you are preparing a questionnaire, it requires utmost skills. The questions must be clear, simple, and to the point, specific. There should be no ambiguity in the questions. It should be clear. It should be simple so that everyone could understand what researcher is asking or wants to ask. And it should be to the point. They must be well organized from the point of view of respondent and be formulated in such a manner as to provide the data in so far as possible in the desired form. It is very important that whenever you are framing a question, organize or frame a question from the point of view of respondent. And should be formulated in such a way that it should collect the data in a required form, in the desired form which a researcher wants. Actually, a questionnaire may said to possess three main aspects: the general form, the question sequence, and the question wording. All these three things are very important, plays a crucial role in framing a questionnaire. That is the general form. Then the question sequence, in which sequence you are asking a questions, and the wording of the questions. What is general form? The form of questionnaire will depend partly on the type of data being sought and partly on the data collection method to be used. On the one hand, there is highly structured questionnaire in which all questions and answers are specified and continents in the respondent's own words are held to minimum. Say there are general form. It is very important while you are framing a questionnaire, what sort of data you want to collect and the method through which you want to collect the data. Is it through observation method? Is it through mail questionnaire? Is it through telephonic interview? Right? It should be clear in the mind of the researcher which method the researcher wants to adopt to collect the data. Then it should be clear in the mind what type of data researcher wants to collect. This questionnaire could be highly structured and could vary from extreme ends, like very satisfied to very unsatisfied. These are the structured. You ask a question and you have given the option. Suppose five options. Yes, I am satisfied with the statement, or I am satisfied with the product. Not satisfied, neither satisfied or not dissatisfied, highly satisfied, highly dissatisfied. Researcher has just to choose one of the option in which the respondent's words are held to a minimum. Respondent just has to choose the one of the options in structured questionnaires. At the other end is unstructured questionnaire, in which interviewer is provided with a general brief or sort of information to be obtained, but exact question is largely his own responsibility. The unstructured questionnaire are useful in carrying out in-depth interviews, where the aim is to probe for attitudes and reasons. If you want to find out the attitude or reasons for something, then unstructured type of questionnaires plays a very important role, because in-depth interviews are required to understand the attitudes and the reasons. A structured questionnaire usually has a fixed alternative answers to each question, and respondent has to choose from those options only. There are simple to They are simple to administer and relatively inexpensive to analyze. The questionnaires have, however, their limitations. Questionnaires are the easiest method or inexpensive method to analyze the data, but there are certain limitations associated with questionnaire. It is not possible to record the responses made by the respondent in their own words. They are considered inappropriate in investigation where the aim happens to probe for attitudes and feelings. What is the drawback of this is respondent it is not possible to record the response made by the respondent in their own words. Next thing is question sequence. After the general format, next thing which one should consider is the question sequence. What should be the question sequence? The introduction to the questionnaire should be short and simple as possible. The following the opening phase should come the questions that are really vital to the interview. Awkward questions which create the risk that the respondent discontinue the interview are usually relegated towards the end. By the time the interview has been terminated, some information is already available with the interviewer. The question sequence should confirm the respondent's way of thinking, and this is where unstructured interviews are highly advantageous. The questionnaire wording. The wording of questions should be impartial so as to not give a biased picture of the true state of affairs. Colorful adjective and undue descriptive phrases should be avoided. The questions should be worded such that they are easily understood, simple, concrete, and conform to respondents' way of thinking. Multiple choice question constitutes the basis of structured questionnaires, particularly in mailed questionnaires. Editing the primary data. Now it is very important to edit the data collected by various methods. What all these require? This is checking the legibility. Legibility means whether everyone has answered the every question. Is there any ambiguity in the answers? Like if someone has chosen more than one option for same answer, for same question. This is legibility. The first thing is has the respondent answered all the question? Right? Has the respondent given one answer or chosen one answer or one option for one question? Next is checking the completeness and consistency. Collection of secondary data. We collect the secondary data through various publications, central, state, and local government. Various publications of foreign government or international bodies, trade, commerce, economics. The other sources of secondary data is books, magazines, newspapers, historical documents, diaries, letters, and all these things. Scrutiny of secondary data is very important. While you are collecting the data, make sure whether the data suits you or is according to your research or not, your objectives or not, whether data is reliable or not. Don't take the data from the unreliable sources. Advocacy of data is important. Data should be adequate, on which you can rely, and accuracy, whether the data is accurate or not. Attitude, measurements, and scales. Attitude, measurements, and scales. First of all, we will discuss the measurement scales. What is attitude? Attitude measurement scale. Suppose we want to find out the attitude of an individual. Attitude is that thing which is difficult to quantify. Suppose a consumer behavior, difficult to quantify. Stress, job satisfaction, difficult to quantify. How can we quantify? How can we measure the attitude? of the respondent. So there are the scales through which we can measure the attitude. What is a scale? A scale is a tool or a mechanism by which individuals are distinguished as to how they differ from one another on a variable of interest to our study. That is when we want to compare the individuals, when we want to compare the individuals on the variables of interest, then that tool or mechanism which helps us to measure the individual distinguishedness on a certain variable under study, that is known as scale. Suppose I want to find out the consumer behavior, how a consumer behaves in the market. Is there any difference in the shopping skills of males and females? What I want to find out that how what is the difference between the males and female shopping skills. So how could I find out the difference? To measure this attitude, a method is required or a tool is required, and that tool is known as the scale. There are four types of scales: nominal scale, ordinal scale, interview scale, and the ratio scale. These are the scales on which we measure the attitude. What is nominal scale? The scale allows the researcher to assign subject to a certain categories or a group. These categories are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. What is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive? Mutually exclusive means one respondent can be a member of one group only. In nominal scale, first of all, understand what in nominal scale, researcher assigned a group to the subject under study. Suppose male, female, right? Or it could be smoker, non-smokers, drivers, non-drivers. So nominal scale allows the researcher to assign subject to a certain categories or a group. The categories are mutually exclusive. Mutually exclusive means one subject can be a member of one group only, but collectively exhaustive. Collectively exhaustive means member of that respondent could be a member of one group. It is mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive. The information that can be generated from nominal scale is the calculation of percentage frequency of sample of the respondent. Example is gender. Suppose I want to find out the attitude or the shopping behavior of males and females. So on this, I can categorize the group into two, that is male and female, and other variables could be I can try to find. I'll try to find out the shopping behavior on the basis of male and female, or suppose on the basis of if I want to find out the job satisfaction level of males and females, or the job or the stress level of two groups, that is of two groups of employees. I can categorize the employees into two groups and try to find out who is more stressed, group 1 or group 2. If I want to find out the performance level of employees after training or before training, there is a group to whom training has been provided by the organization, and there is a group to which training has not been provided. So there are two groups, trained groups and untrained group. I want to find out the level of performance of the group, who performs well. Next scale is ordinal scale. Ordinal scale not only categorize the variable, it also rank the order of categories in some meaningful way, like from best to worst or from first to last. It provides more information than the nominal scale. It goes beyond differentiating the categories to provide the information on how a respondent distinguishes them by rank ordering them. The ordinal scale does not give any indication of magnitude of difference among the ranks. Ordinal scale not only categorizes the variable male and female, but it also provides the information about the rank. It provides the rank order, but we cannot find out the magnitude of difference between the rank. Suppose at the level of satisfaction, when a company asks from a customer, please rank our services on the scale of 1 to 10. This is ordinal scale. 1 to 10, when we rank the level of satisfaction on 1 to 10, you cannot find out whether the difference between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4 is 1, 1 or not. There is no indication of magnitude of a difference. Right? Then comes the interview scale. In interview scale, researcher performs certain arithmetical operations on the data collected. The researcher measures the distance between any 2 points on the scale and can calculate mean standard deviation on this data. In ordinal scale, we cannot carry out arithmetic operations because there is in ordinal, as it is written, that scale does not indicate the magnitude of a difference. It could be like when you have to give a response from 1 to 5 point scale, then it is not like this. The difference between 1 to 2 is same as 2 to 3 or same as 3 to 4 or 4 to 5. It has not been mentioned. One could be poor or satisfied. 5 could be highly satisfied. But there is no particular magnitude of a difference. While in interval scales, we can find out the mean. We can carry out the arithmetic operation. We can find out the difference of level of satisfaction, whether males are more stressed or females are more stressed, or whether males are better driver or females are better driver. We can calculate the mean and the standard deviation on this data. Interval scale not only group the individual according to the certain categories and they tag the order of these group. It also measured the magnitude of difference in preference among the individual. It measures the magnitude of difference. It is more powerful than nominal and ordinal scale. It measures the central tendency, variance, standard deviation, etc. Another scale is ratio scale. Example of interval scale is I want to find out the level of stress of two groups of employees. I can find out who is more stressed, A group or B group, males or females. I can calculate the mean, the standard deviation while using the nominal scale. A ratio scale overcomes the arbitrary original point of interview scale. In interval scale, there was an arbitrary scale, but ratio scale has a actual starting point, and it has absolute 0 point. It not only measures the magnitude of difference between the points on the scale but also taps the proportion of the difference. It is most powerful of all the scales. And this is the chart which tells the difference, order, distance, unique origin, central tendencies, dispersion of various scales, attitudinal scales. That's all for today. Thank you very much. Namaskar.